Most people think the Beatitudes are a list. 8 separate blessings. 8 different types of people who are somehow considered fortunate. The poor in spirit, the mourners, the meek, the hungry, the merciful. You read them like a menu. Pick the ones that apply to you. Move on. But what if that's completely wrong? What if the Beatitudes are not 8 separate statements, but 8 steps on a single staircase? And what if you're already on one of them? Here is what I mean. Read the Beatitudes again, carefully, and notice what happens to the person as you move through them. The first Beatitude begins with someone who has nothing. Blessed are the poor in spirit, spiritually empty, aware of their own inadequacy before God. No pride, no pretense. Just empty. That is not a destination. That is a starting point. Because only someone who recognizes they have nothing will grieve over what they lost, which is exactly the second Beatitude. Blessed are those who mourn. The spirit that was emptied now grieves the depth of its own poverty. It sees the weight of sin, its own sin, the world's brokenness, and it aches. Do you see the progression? You don't get to genuine mourning until you've accepted genuine poverty of spirit. One produces the other, not randomly, necessarily. And mourning, real mourning, the kind that has processed its own grief and not fought it, produces meekness, the third Beatitude. Blessed are the meek. Meekness is not weakness. In the original language, it's the word used for a trained warhorse, full power, under control. But the only way to arrive at genuine meekness is to have mourned, to have been broken and not become bitter, to have grieved and come out the other side, steady. And then the fourth, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. A person who is meek, genuinely meek, is not passive. They burn. They want the world to be as God intended it. The hunger comes directly from the mourning that came directly from the poverty of spirit. Do you see this? Each stage is building the next. You cannot skip one. And hunger, genuine spiritual hunger, produces mercy. Because when you have been desperate yourself, you cannot look at someone else's desperation with contempt. The fifth Beatitude, blessed are the merciful. Not people who are nice. People who recognize in another person's failure the same desperation they found in themselves in Beatitude 1. Mercy flows from hunger. Hunger flows from meekness. Meekness flows from mourning. Mourning flows from poverty of spirit. This is not a menu. This is a transformation, and it keeps going. Because mercy, practiced faithfully, cleanses the heart. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. The sixth Beatitude. The eye of the heart becomes clear only when it has stopped being used for self-justification, only when it has spent itself in mercy for others. The pure in heart are not people who never sinned. They are people whose hearts are undivided, no longer working two agendas. And a person with an undivided heart becomes a peacemaker. The seventh Beatitude, not a conflict avoider, a peacemaker, someone who enters broken situations and creates something that wasn't there before. That capacity comes from purity of heart, which came from mercy, which came from hunger, which came from meekness, which came from mourning, which came from poverty of spirit. And then the eighth Beatitude. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness. Here is what the structure is telling you. A person who has traveled all 7 previous stages, a person who is genuinely poor in spirit, who mourns, who is meek, who hungers, who shows mercy, who is pure in heart, who makes peace. That person will be rejected, not because they failed, because they succeeded. A life that genuinely embodies all of this is a confrontation to the world around it. Not an aggressive confrontation, simply an existence that makes other ways of living uncomfortable. And here is the detail that stops you cold. The first Beatitude promises, theirs is the kingdom of heaven. The eighth Beatitude promises, theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Identical, word for word. Every other Beatitude has a different promise, inheriting the earth, seeing God, being called sons of God. But the first and the last share the same promise. That is not an accident. It is the architecture telling you, you enter the staircase with nothing, and after the full journey, What you receive is the same thing you were promised at the start. But you are not the same person who started, you went in poor in spirit, and came out willing to be persecuted. You went in with empty hands and came out with open ones. You went in as someone who had nothing to offer and came out as someone who gives everything. The kingdom of heaven was the promise at the door. And after all 8 stages, it is still the promise. But now you understand what the kingdom costs. The question the Beatitudes are actually asking is not which one describes you. The question is, where are you on the staircase? Because everyone who has ever taken God seriously is somewhere on it. Some people are still in Beatitude 1, just beginning to recognize their own poverty. That is not failure. That is the only honest starting place. Some have been in Beatitude 3 for years, broken, steady, waiting. Some are in 7, making peace in places that cost them everything. None of these is the wrong place to be, because the promise at every step is the same kingdom. The Sermon on the Mount is not a list of personality types who get rewarded. It is a map of one complete human life, lived all the way through. If this opens something up for you, there's more. Subscribe and stay with us.